Welcome to Why I with Tim Whitehead. I often get asked why I do certain things or why I believe certain things. Why do I like Coke better than Pepsi? Well, that's an obvious one. But much more importantly is, why do I do what I do with my life? You see, I work for a mission agency and I host a radio program interviewing Christian missionaries. Now, don't run away, just give me a chance to explain why I. You see, maybe when I say the word missionary, you think of guys in short-sleeve white button-up shirts knocking on your door at the most inopportune times. Or worse, you're thinking of like the 14 and 1500s when the explorers were going around the world and bringing priests with them and forcibly converting indigenous tribes and doing all sorts of horrible things. I get it. I get that there's a bad reputation or a bad thought about what missionaries are. And if you're a church-going Christian, you'll probably think of missionaries as those kind of eccentric people that show up every couple years with pictures of grass huts where they've sold everything where they live, and they live over in a grass hut in Africa, and they've come asking for money. And there's some disconnect. So why would I spend all my time and effort interviewing people that are missionaries, that are trying to convince people that what they believe is wrong, and giving up things and living in other cultures, and it's a weird thing. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because of this book. This is a Bible. Again, just give me a chance. Don't leave yet, all right? If you've never seen a Bible before, if you think it's all make-believe, just give me a chance. The Bible is not actually one book. It's 66 different writings. Some of them are letters to people with instructions. Some of it's historical stories. Some of it's just poems. But there's 66 different books written across over 1,000 years by 30 some odd writers in 3 different languages, all compiled into one place. Now, what about the question that it's, been manipulated, or it's not real, it's a fairy tale, it's a myth, just like the Greek gods or the stuff we're watching in Marvel movies, all that kind of stuff? Well, here's the thing. The New Testament of the Bible, so that's the 27 last books of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all the way to Revelation, are the most authentic collection of written manuscripts in the history of the world. Don't believe me? Google it yourself. Just Google NT, New Testament manuscripts. And you'll probably see a chart something like this, showing all of the ancient writings of the world, Homer's Iliad, Caesar's Wars, the Gallic Wars, all these manuscripts that people believe were written by who they claim to be written by, and giving an account of what really happened. The problem is, the oldest known manuscript for Homer's Iliad is 500 years after he lived. So there's a 500-year gap before they found the oldest manuscript. No one questions. No, I took classics in university. I read it. No one questions that Homer wrote this thing. But the New Testament, the oldest known manuscripts are within 100 years of the actions that they're describing actually taking place. When they talk about Jesus doing miracles, when they talk about him dying on the cross and rising from the dead, the oldest known manuscripts are found and would have been around when the children of the people who witnessed those things were alive. They could have gone to their parents and said, "Is this really true?" It's one generation away. Not only the recency of the manuscripts, but the volume. You wouldn't believe the numbers, the thousands and thousands of written manuscripts that have been found across North Africa, Middle East, into Europe, of the entire collection of 27 books of the New Testament. Not just a fragment here or there, but the entire collection, Matthew to Revelation. As a whole unit, thousands, 5,000 plus. And they're within 90% accurate to one another. Look it up yourself. Check out the London Museum. This isn't a Christian thing. This is a historical documented thing. This is the most authentic piece of literature in the history of mankind. Now, what about the first 39 books, something we call the Old Testament? This is what the Jewish scriptures are. It includes the Torah, the prophets, and so on, the Psalms. What about them? People say, well, they've been manipulated. They're so old, they must have been manipulated. Well, here's another thing. in around the 1950s, 1960s, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Again, don't take my word for it. Google it yourself. Google's not a Christian company. You just look for stuff. Google Dead Sea Scrolls. Some kid in the backwoods of Jerusalem, Judea area, walked into a cave, found clay pots with fragments of the Old Testament scriptures. Big, huge chunks of Isaiah and other parts of scripture. You know what? What's written in the books that we have today in 2022 is what was written in those books. And they've dated those manuscripts and those clay pots back to 100 years before Jesus came around. So all those prophecies in the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled, they weren't manipulated. We've seen this now. We have documented archaeological evidence dated that those things were written before Jesus came around. So here we have it, the most reliable, trustworthy written document in the history of mankind. Why do I do what I do? Because I believe it. It's not a big leap of faith. Again, it was written by the eyewitnesses, verified. There's a great quote by a guy named Chuck Colson. You've heard of Bounty Gate and Deflate Gate if you're a football fan. Well, the original gate was Watergate. Richard Nixon stealing documents from his political rivals, and a bunch of people got all caught up in it. Chuck Colson was one of them. And he says, and I'm roughly quoting it here, but you can see it on the screen, that within 2 weeks of being found out, all the people involved in Watergate couldn't keep the lie. They couldn't keep the secret. They gave up on it. They were going to jail. They spilled their guts. What about the disciples of Jesus and the followers of Jesus that were all but one martyred for what they believed? And for the early Christians who suffered persecution, and many were martyred under a succession of Roman emperors. I really like Chuck's quote because it shows if this wasn't true, those people wouldn't have died for it. Maybe 1 or 2 radicals, but not all of them. Actually, it was 10. Judas killed himself. John lived. The other 10 were all martyred. I got to get my math right. We want to be right on this YI series. So they hung around. If you want more of this kind of documents or more of this kind of analysis, there's a couple other good resources. J. Warner Wallace wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. He comes from it from a police officer standpoint, looking at forensic evidence. You can look at The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, a lawyer's view at it. They come to the same conclusion. There was a Jesus. He really lived. He really performed miracles. He really died. He was really crucified bodily on a Roman cross 2,000 years ago, and he really rose again. Why do I do what I do? Because this is authentic, and because I believe that what it says is true. And if Jesus died and rose again, well, that changes everything. Now, I had to do this research myself for my own sake. Full disclosure, I grew up in a home where my parents brought me to church. My grandfather was a pastor, okay? That's full disclosure. But I still had to do this for myself. Don't just believe me. Don't believe the rest of social media. Go out and research this for yourself about the authenticity of the scriptures. Here's when it made it really real for me. I loved playing basketball growing up. I was sure I was going to be an NBA player. Yeah, I'm a 5'9" white guy that can't jump. Yeah, we all got dreams. I had a basketball coach I really liked and really respected, and poured a lot of his life into me, gave me a lot of good instructions on how to lead others and make good choices for myself. Interestingly enough, though, he was into martial arts and into Buddhism. And he gave me Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance and Zen in the art of archery. And I read them. Honestly, legitimately, as a teenager, I was deciding for myself, did I really believe this book, the Bible, was authentic or not? I mean, Buddhism sounds big. It's lots of people, billions of people believe in it. So I had to decide for myself. And I don't want to be slamming other religions. That's not the point of this program. You can watch somebody else, I'm sure, for that. But I had to decide. Was I going to follow those instructions and the philosophies of Zen and the art of archery? You don't shoot at the target, be the target, all that kind of stuff. And I really struggled with it. But when I came down to it, again, I'm not a really big person on faith. I don't believe a lot. I'm an accountant by trade. I'm skeptical by nature. It was the authenticity argument that won it for me as a teenager. And that's when I decided that I was going to be a Christian. And that's when later on, I decided I was going to actually do something more than just believe it, but I was going to do something. And the next time we talk, we're going to talk a little bit more about Jesus himself. But I want to challenge you, do the research yourself. Find out whether or not this book is reliable, whether it's authentic. Then maybe read part of it. Just the Gospel of John. It really talks about who Jesus is, what he did, what it's all about. Just start there and then decide for yourself why you believe what you believe. Why do you act the way you act? When you get face to face with Jesus, it may change your life, so be careful. But that's why I do what I do.